Just over 10 years ago, Gold Sullivan took over at West Ham United. They had an awful lot to say about the debts at the club, how they were recruited, how they were going to sort them out. A lot of this stuff that you're about to see from their first press conference is going to sound very, very familiar. Let's have a look.
The debts here are so large, it's the previous regime that's run up enormous debts. There's still £100 million of debt here. West Ham have borrowed against the next 2 years season ticket money.
So, I've got a new set of wheels. Huh? Good, huh? New chair. Waited a long time for this. I'm not joking, I really did. I ordered it like on a Prime thing from Amazon. Like Prime, 2 days, 3 weeks. I was a chair about 3 weeks ago. Anyway, okay. You didn't tune in to talk about my chair with wheels and squeaks, didn't it? Hear it. We'll have to sort that out. Anyway, I was deciding what video to do for today. And I think, well, I'm not going to lie. I did the videos with Sean a couple of days ago, and they were very popular. People really sort of got their teeth into them, and I can guess it wasn't because it wasn't because Sean was on, and it wasn't because of me. I think it was the subject matter, and it was our finances, which I do believe is a hot topic of discussion because there's so much mystery shrouded in it. And it was really the figure that we came up with, which was 100 million. It appears that West Ham, in one form or another, have basically just saddled themselves with £100 million worth of debt. Now, that's a significant amount. And the reason that's a significant amount, because it will trigger it in your brain as exactly it did mine, that was precisely the amount that David Sullivans and David Gold gave as the reason they were taking over West Ham, what they needed to rescue us from. They were rescuing us from a poorly managed club that had been saddled with over £100 million worth of debt. And I've gone back and I've gone and looked at the original press conference, and well, I'm gonna edit it in here, and then we're gonna look at each bit, look at it bit by bit, and it makes for fascinating watching. I'm sure you'll agree. Let's crack straight on with it. I'll play the first segment now.
Because the debts here are so large, most English people can't carry those debts, and we'd like to spread that across as many supporters as we can. We want as many people, strong people who are genuine supporters of the club, to get involved with the board and to dig the club out the mess it's in.
Right, I mean, so that's really clear. He's saying the debts at the club are so large. They're absolutely so large. At this point, they've taken 50% holding in West Ham, but they with that 50%, they have an operational... they have the operational jurisdiction to do what they want with it. But the debts are so large, he's saying what we'd actually want to do is we want to get more people on board to help us with that debt, to take more shares. And it was very, very clear we'd like to invite West Ham fans in to help us. Now, this is going to be something that is going to be a feature of this video, because that won't be the last time he mentions the West Ham fans, help from the West Ham fans, and certainly transparency and letting the West Ham fans what are going on with the financing. Now, it's a very, very long sequence. I've broken it down. I've basically got 1 minute and 13 seconds, and you've just watched 17 seconds of it, of what I think are the hot topics in it. But he talks for a long time. He's very clear. He's unequivocally clear on this, that the West Ham fans need to know. There needs to be clarity. And he is at pains to explain exactly what's gone on under previous regimes, what's going out, what's coming in, and the fact that we are borrowing and have borrowed beyond our means. I found it interesting as well about West Ham fans helping us out, because that is... I think what he meant initially was, he goes on to speak about Tony Fernandez coming in and helping out. Now, Tony Fernandez was one of bidders. If I take you back to that bidding process, it wasn't just Gold Sullivan weren't the only people in for us. There was Tony Fernandez, who also bid a similar amount. And I often wonder why this happened. I believe there was a group called the Interstellar Group. I think Tony Cottee may have had something to do with it. I may be wrong. I believe they actually bid more than for 50% of the club. And so, I mean, it's interesting. So at the moment, the bank still hold 50%. Just listen to what they say now.
It's the previous regime that's run up enormous debts and taken on wages and liabilities that a club of this size just can't support.
So he's saying the previous regime are basically spending beyond their means. And he's saying this is a huge debt. This is an absolutely massive debt, which of course is the 100 million, which we're going to go on to in a second. But again, it is quite clear. 100 million's too much. the previous regime have been frivolous, have overspent. And I think the context of this very much is that they were going to come in and they were going to save us. And the whole plan, the original plan, whilst it was a 10-point plan, there was pretty much a 5-year pledge to get rid of that £100 million worth of debt. And we obviously we find ourselves in, I say 10 years, possibly closer to 11 years now under their stewardship. I don't know how much debt we're in. We had to guess at the figures, myself and Sean, the other day, certainly. But I would imagine that, just taking into account the borrowing that we've done, taking into account the money we owe for players, and obviously you've got to take into account the fact that we are owed money as well, I would suggest we're no further along the line. And he uses the phrase on several occasions to move up to the next level. I'll just play the next clip.
Pay down some of the debt, and we've injected new money as working capital. But there's still £100 million of debt here. Still. And in just very, very simplistic terms, there's 50 million owed to banks. There's 40 million pound owed to other clubs.
I mean, that I think is really, really, really clear. So he said the 100 million. I know he's accounted for 90, but he does later on account for the other 10. It's too bitty. 50 million to banks and 40 million to clubs. Well, this is not vastly different from the situation that we're in now, because we've already discussed that they borrowed 30 million from themselves, basically. Although it was a rights issue, it was a cash injection. We also know that they have borrowed 25 million, and then we think they've secured another facility for another 25 million, which is, one of them is done on collateral. And with the collateral they're using is the training grounds, as we know. We discussed this with Sean if you watched the video the other day. And the second part is against next season's TV money. Now that's really important, because he's really clear during this whole interview that that's a bad thing to do. It is not a prudent thing to do, to borrow against next year's season ticket money. Just listen to the next bit.
And I think it's important we tell the supporters exactly the position, so there's not a penny to come in.
That is clear as well. Sorry, I know I just stopped there. He said it's really important that we tell the supporters exactly the position. Again, it's clarity. He wants clarity. He wants an open dialogue with the supporters. He wants to convey a message, which that doesn't really sit hand in hand with what we've seen recently. And this is why we need a supporter's voice in or around the board, because we've seen the previous constructs. We've seen the OSB, which was a supporters board which was cherry picked by the club. You cannot have a supporters board that's elected by the club. The supporters have to elect the supporters board. But he's very clear here. He wants to convey this message to the fans. There's no money. He says there's not a penny due to come in, which is obviously not the case now. But just listen on.
In addition, West Ham have borrowed against the next 2 years' season ticket money. They've taken 70% of next year's season ticket money, 60% of the season ticket money afterwards. So those three figures alone come to £102 million. In addition, there's the Alan Kirbishley settlement, and there's various other bits and pieces.
So he's explaining why we're skint. He's explaining why, and it's quite clear why they're bad. He's saying this is a bad thing. We're skint because the previous owners have kept on borrowing against next season's season ticket money. That's exactly what we've done now. That's exactly the situation we're in now. Now, I'm going to go and I will make the COVID excuse for them in just a second, but it doesn't tell the whole tale, by the way, because we were borrowing before COVID. I think that would explain the rights issue and the shares issue. And I do think, as you know, I think players have got their part to play. Everybody needs to saddle this debt in that sense, particularly the people who take the most money out of the football club, which are players. Of course, agents take a massive amount as well. However, he's really clear on this. It is not a prudent strategy, and we are £100 million in debt because we owe people so much money, and to try and get out of it, we've made the stupid mistake of borrowing against next season's season ticket money. Well, that's what we've done now, and we've actually even got secured a loan on the maximum that we can get, which is even based on us getting relegated. So basically, we're hedging our loan in and against what would be relegation parachute payments. Also, really, just something funny, which it was, well, you would have thought the same thing when you heard it. Basically, he's suggesting, and he goes on and he goes into more detail later on, that the club made a mistake in hiring Alan Kirbishley, and the fact that they're having to pay him off is saddling the club with a massive debt and a massive payoff. He will go on later on in the press conference, not just this one, to say they're loyal to their managers, and so on and so forth. But it's really, really difficult when you look at the situation and you look at the fact, well, actually, we don't know, because this clarity, that the sharing of information with fans, of which he speaks, we don't see so much of that anymore. We're not getting much information from the club. But it would appear to me that the very things he was criticising when he initially came in, which was massive borrowing, owing clubs 40 million. I don't know how much of the Sebastian Haller payment is left. I think, according to Sean, it might be about half of it, something like that. We paid 20 million up front. I certainly would imagine we owe an awful lot of the Felipe Anderson money still. I'm sure there's still money for Diop. I'm sure there's lots of money to come in now. He says in this that there's not a lot of money coming in back then when he took over. I understand we took all the money up front for Arnautovic from the Chinese club. It's not like we've sold loads and loads of players. So I think we probably owe more than 40 million that we did back then for players. I think we are borrowing. We're still borrowing from the banks, and he said there's too much debt to the banks. And we're certainly borrowing against next year's ticket revenue, or at least have set up a facility to do so. And then the final thing, well, Pellegrini's payoff. Is Pellegrini's payoff any different for Kirbishley's? I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs, but I would imagine it's just as bad. And, well, probably more expensive. You'd imagine Pellegrini was on bigger wages than Alan Kirbishley. And certainly we've had Huselos to pay off, and I think Pellegrini and Huselos' sons were both employees or scouts at the club, or something along those lines. And you just look at it and you think, we are no further forward than we were. And you will be able to use COVID as mitigation, granted. But I think to use it wholly as mitigation would be to tell a lie about what's just happened. Because I think, were that to be the only factor, then it would mean we would have been in absolutely fantastic financial health up until, whatever, last April. We'd have had no debts up until last April. Our trading would have been brilliant up until last April. No loans, payday loans up until last April. Well, we did have those things. We did owe Pellegrini money. We were still in debt. And we now find ourselves back precisely where we were, if not in even more debt. There's no point going into the stadium and whatnot. We may even be in a slightly better financial position because we don't own the stadium. I certainly wouldn't want to be in Tottenham's position in having to pay back £1 billion stadium. So look, we're in a better state than most. But let's not forget, we did own our previous stadium. It's not like we had a load of debts to pay on our previous stadium. We owned Upton Park. So I don't see us being in any better position. I think we're in a worse position. And when I look at where we are now, and for those of you that watch the channel for a while, and those of you that watched my Newcastle video when initially it was rumoured that the Saudi consortium were going to take over Newcastle, and I got a lot of stick. I said they won't. It ain't happening. They will not take over. I smelt a rat. It wasn't right. And then I said at the start of COVID, I thought it wasn't going to go through because nobody's going to buy a football club at the moment. Why would you? And there were lots of people agree, but there were numerous people who said, "Oh no, it's a buyer's market at the moment." I think for some things it's a buyer's market. I think possibly if you're cash rich and you want to buy a house, it's a good time because you probably know eventually if you've got the time to sit on that house, not literally sit on the roof, but to sit on the investment, and you don't need it to live in, then eventually the housing market will pick up and probably, what with no stamp duty and whatnot, you will return an investment on that house. It's not the same as a football club. That house, if you're cash rich, doesn't have to bring in any revenue. A football club does. And depressingly, and I'm sorry to finish on such a thing, particularly as so many of you would like Gold and Sullivan to leave and sell up, I think it's a futile wish. I really do, because I just don't believe that there's anybody out there who's going to want to come in and buy West Ham. And the very thing that I feel made us attractive before, which owning our own stadium, we don't. It's not like anybody can come in and there's a cohesive relationship between West Ham and the stadium owners. So that's not a reason to buy us. And I also look at the fact of, well, okay, maybe had we have been in a position whereby we had paid off all our debts and we were debt free, then absolutely fine. But you think if anybody comes in now, not only have they got to pay Gold Sullivan's valuation, which many of us think is inflated anyway, whoever comes in is going to have to also pay down or take on £100 million worth of debt. They talk about Newcastle. They say Newcastle is, whilst actually might be valuing it at 200 million, actually the price of Newcastle is closer to 300 million or something like that, because you've got to take into account the debts it has. I just found it amazing. I found it fascinating watching that original press conference and him giving a load of reasons as to why the club was in a state. And then we look at it now, and those same reasons still exist. Just literally just new versions of them.